Today on the 01581 Let's Talk, a conversation about a project here in Westborough that has been long in the making and supported by some very dedicated individuals with personal connections. This is a story you'll want to watch. Hi and welcome back. I'm Shelby Marshall. I'm the host of the 01581 Let's Talk. Thanks for tuning in. I am welcomed today by several guests. I'll let them introduce themselves. We're going to talk today about the Westborough Cemetery Memorial Project. This project is located in Pine Grove Cemetery, and I won't talk about the details because we've got some folks who are dedicated to this project and have spent years, literally, working on it, and I'm going to let them tell the story. But I'm honored to be joined, and we'll start with introductions to my far right with Barbara. Barbara, welcome.
Thank you very much for having us.
And you are?
I'm Barbara Banks. I'm a longtime resident of Westborough and worked at Advocates for many years. I also, since 2012, have been involved in the committee.
Excellent. And sort of, is it fair to call you sort of the resident historian of the group?
I have been named that, yes.
Okay, all right. So we'll probably put that label on you. Ed.
My name is Edward Clinton. I'm an architect. My office was in Framingham for many years, and I started it with the project in 2011, 2012, and I'm the designer of the project.
Excellent. Heidi.
Yeah, I'm Heidi Trainer, and thank you so much for having us here today to talk about our project. I became involved with the Cemetery Memorial Project in 2012, and really for me it was a personal journey of knowing what it's like to be in the mental health system and knowing Glenn and his vision for remembering those who are buried in those unmarked graves and just wanting to honor their life and celebrate their life and share the awareness that people you know may be in this field, and how can we reconnect you.
Excellent, excellent. And we'll talk about Glenn in just a few minutes as kind of that very personal connection here in Westborough to this very large project. Amy.
Hi, Shelby.
Hi.
Thank you for having us. We feel really privileged for this opportunity.
Excited to have you.
I'm Amy Morgan, and I'm a licensed independent clinical social worker and spent about 30 years working in Metro West, working at Advocates in a big human service organization. And through my time there, got involved in the project, as that's kind of where most of us connected.
Yeah.
And
you're like the grant guru, right? Is that
I try to. I'm pretty good at asking for money.
Excellent. All right. Well, we'll get to that part as part of the show,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
All right. Excellent. Okay. So, not with us today on camera. Two very important individuals to this project and cause, if you will. Glenn Malloy, and Ed, you're going to talk about that. And off camera, we've got Sarah Utka as well. And so I just want to acknowledge those individuals as well as part of this project. Okay. So, Ed, take it away.
So, back in the early 2000s, I worked with Glenn. Glenn was on a panel, and I was architect for some housing for people with disabilities. And Glenn was a very vocal, very intelligent contributor to our group. I knew Glenn from high school at Framingham South High School. Glenn was a year ahead of me. I remember him as a great gymnast and a tremendous student. And, you know, he was always kind of an inspiration to me. He always was able to.
We won't ask graduating years on this show, just so you know that we don't talk about that.
It was, so he started talking about this project probably in the 2011 or so, and he was passionate about it from the beginning. So he had he had a lot of insight in it, and to it. He had been a patient at the institution. He was just an inspiration. So he asked me if I could participate in the group, and I greatly accepted. And as you'll hear from the members of our group, you become passionate when you start to get into the concept of how these people, over 700 of them, came to Pine Grove, and they're laid to rest without any markings. And there's so many interesting stories about these people, and we felt compelled to mark the place where these people were with their names.
So now, Heidi, we're going to talk in just a moment about your connection, as Ed mentioned, but just for sort of context and big picture, and I'm going to look to all of you to keep me kind of on the straight and narrow here. So when we talk about this and this place and this project, so when you go into Pine Grove Cemetery, you kind of, I'll say sort of straight in, and then there's the War Memorial to honor our veterans, and then to the left, there's sort of a place where you don't see any gravestones. And Pine Grove's a very old cemetery, beautiful cemetery, beautiful place to walk through and to kind of honor those and just to kind of take in, the beauty of it. But in that space, it's just grass. And so I remember the first time going in there thinking, oh, it's an undeveloped part of the Westborough Cemetery, right? I'm sure you guys are nodding. How many people,
I'm
thought
so glad
that,
you said that, because I used to walk there, and my husband and I sort of speculated, why is this not being developed when they're developing other spots?
And you can see that over to the far right.
Yes.
There are newer, right. And so
and
you go,
if you go down in, there are a few stones that people have identified there, but that's exactly
Right.
And then Sarah Ucker asked me to come to a memorial service there, and I was
what do
blown
you
away
mean?
that
Right.
this is where that was. So
Right.
yes.
So this
sorry
is
for
a
that.
resting place. No, this is the final resting place of, you said this, over 700 individuals who at some point spent a portion of their life at the State Hospital here in Westborough, correct?
I think it's about 600 people from the state hospital,
Okay.
and then about
Oh, it's almost 700
Almost
from
700,
the
and then-
state hospital.
Okay.
some
Uh,
who were
they were
homeless.
first one was buried in 1887, and the last one was 1990.
Okay.
So it spans quite a few years. so.
And as well as, in kind of old times, we might have called part of this also the paupers field,
Yes.
right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so this is a combination of people who didn't have the means to be buried, as well as really the bulk of them who came and were part of and passed away then at the state hospital and were buried, or could they have left and somehow found their way back to Westborough?
Most of them were buried from
As
the
a result.
hospital. There
Okay.
are some that weren't.
Okay.
And there is also another list of paupers. So that's over and above
Okay.
what we're talking about for the state
Wow.
hospital.
Wow.
There's also a baby section where some names are there and some aren't. So.
And so for individuals, before we get to kind of the
Yeah.
beautiful work that's been done to really memorialize this, if one were to walk there now, and you were to kind of look in the grass, and depends on the season and how kind of it's been maintained, because
Right.
we'll talk a little bit about the maintenance. It really has to be kind of very meticulous, and it's a lot of work, a lot of manual work. Some of the markings are about this big.
Yes.
They're like clay or ceramic. Some might be a metal disc, correct? And literally they're numbers,
Yes.
right?
And some are worn off.
Right.
But it's a grid.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So again, just for an appreciation, we've probably all walked through cemeteries. You see some grand, some maybe simpler, but sort of the enormity of walking through there and thinking about that was the final
Right.
way these lives were recognized. And if it weren't for this amazing group and the work, and we'll talk about that now, and the connection, those lives otherwise might be a blank space in a field.
Exactly.
Right?
Right.
So to that end, then, Heidi, what's your connection to this project and to Glenn? And in advance, I want to thank you for sharing what is a very personal story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the way you described it is beautiful, because I think when you drive in there now, what you see is the field, but then you see the beginnings of the memorial. You see the beginning of having a space for people to come and reflect and remember. And I'm somebody who, similar to Glenn, has spent a lot of time in the mental health system. I became involved in the project while I was working as a certified peer specialist, and so my job was share my experience and advocate. And I'm somebody who almost went to Westborough State Hospital in 2006. So when I heard about Glenn's vision of, first of all, I didn't even know people were buried in unmarked graves. That was the beginning. I was like, wait a minute. And he was like, we need to honor these people. And I'm like, oh my, well, of course. Like Ed has said, every name has a story.
Right.
And every story deserves to be told and shared and celebrated. And so for me, it's really a way to tap into what it's like to be, you know, feeling alienated and feeling alone and feeling like you're separate in a diagnosis, not a person, and how wonderful it is to be able to give these people their name and their recognition, and even the larger community to have that as well. And I know others might speak to this, but you know, we've had people reach out to us on our Facebook page and say, I heard about your project, you know, somebody distant relative was there. And Barbara will know the name. You know, we haven't found all of the names, but a lot of them we have. And I think it's really a way for not just people who have direct connections, but the larger community to recognize and celebrate people whose lives mattered.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about the lives, kind of immediately my train of thought goes to like history, right? And how do we know who they were, right? So the state hospital, you know, had records, right? But that doesn't mean those records translated to Pine Grove and into this project. So enter Barbara. Like, I feel like we should have like a little like animated, here comes Barbara with her like, you know, glasses and book and ready to go.
I have to say, it's thanks to the town of Westborough as well. A lot of the cemeteries from state hospitals were on state property, so you had to rely on them for the records, and as you say, some of the records got lost or they were moved or whatever. We started with our initial group had a representation from the cemetery committee and the DPW, and DMH was also there, so there was a lot of interest in where we were going to get the records. We were able to obtain them from the DPW. They have a ledger of all the names. Sarah Ucka helped me compile a list. And then from there we went to the town clerk, and they were just wonderful. They so these are all public records. We didn't violate any HIPAA rules or anything. Right. And they were wonderful. They opened up for us and let us look at all the ledgers. So we were able to compare the name from the cemetery department to the death certificates is what we were looking at.
I remember, and you wouldn't remember this, but we've met a couple times now.
Yes.
But I remember when I was just sort of getting involved in town things, and I would go into the town clerk's office for some reason, and there was this woman with a book and a ruler and writing down, and I was like, what is she doing? And like when I would go back, there was this woman. I was like, I think she lives here. That was you.
Not a bad place to live.
Yeah. No. So you were matching the records.
So we were matching and checking the spelling of the names as well, and several people had 2 or 3 aliases, so we were trying to figure out which was the correct name. Stories, the death certificate, some of the older ones had stories on them, so it was interesting to find out.
Sure.
It also related to medicine. There was a diagnosis on some of them, which went away with the advent of penicillin. So this was, and different things like that. There's also a stone in the cemetery, Reverend Westborough.
Okay.
But we couldn't find his name in the record that he was buried there. But at the DPW, they had a little tag that came from the crematory, and it said his wishes were to be spread among his flock, because he was the chaplain. So his ashes were there, and there's a memorial stone. So there's lots of stories there, lots of history for Westborough. The state hospital was part of our history. It employed people.
Yep.
And different things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of history there, and again, but it comes down to I mean, they're right one after another, and your heart goes out that they were buried like that. And I think there's even a story on our website of a woman who had been in Westborough State, and her fear was that she would die and be put in there. From what I understand, there's a stone nearby that overlooks that. She did not go into Westborough. So there's just so many stories there, and but again, it comes down to memorializing these people.
Yeah, and to think about, I mean, I've sort of thought about where I might be buried
Yeah.
someday, or if I will be buried or what have you, but to think about members of our community who, albeit probably had certainly challenges and difficulties kind of being part of that system, right? And particularly back then.
Right.
Much more so than now, right? But even still. And to think that that long-term look was like, that's where I might be. I mean, the way you just said that, I was just,
That was her, yeah.
you know, like,
Yeah.
talk about a very, amidst maybe sadness in life, to think about that's my end
Right,
place
right.
think
is
it's-
heartbreaking.
It's one of the big fears when you're in the mental health system that you're going to be forgotten.
Yes.
And, you know,
Well, because you may be, excuse me for interrupting, you may
Yeah.
be feeling forgotten along the way anyway.
Yes.
And then
exactly,
when
exactly.
my time is no longer here on this side of the grass, right?
And we don't know like who had connections to their family and whose family knew they passed away, and we don't know who
Right.
kind of died not knowing. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And
Yeah.
people might not have known. And
No.
Glenn talks a lot about the importance for him of kind of how the mental health system has been changing, and kind of how there's more awareness of the importance of human connection, and how
Sure.
everybody's a person, not a diagnosis. But did those people have that experience? You know, and can we reflect and remember that person behind the name and really just celebrate their life?
What I love about this is that it's gone from perhaps a place of forgotten or off to the side to a place of very much relevance and elevation. And so we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and kind of talk about where we at today, the beautiful work of Ed and your talents, and the work that's been done to raise the money, because you know it takes money to do these things, and then we'll continue our story. Hi, and welcome back to this amazing show on the Westborough Cemetery Memorial Project. We've talked a lot about the history of the project, and now we're going to kind of fast forward to where we are today. Throughout our dialogue and sort of the back half of the show, you'll see pictures of the Memorial Project as it is today. We'll also make sure to include information on this group's website, their Facebook page, and also a link to fundraising, which we'll get to, because that's a very important part of bringing this project to kind of its next culmination. I don't know that it ever ends. So with that, let's turn to the architect and designer.
So
Walk us through.
Again, you know, when you're contemplating these people, and over 700 of them, you can't help but to become passionate about the project, and really our whole committee has been passionate for all their time on the committee, and that's how the design sort of began. We wanted a place, so I'd go over there and I just kind of be in this space, and you could hear the crows, and it was almost like they were talking to me. It's almost like they were trying to get their story out. So we're here to complete that and to name the people that are there, so that we have a way to tell their stories. This is the beginning. So the stories will come out. With Ancestry.com, people
Yes.
are discovering so much more about their stories. To link it to this site would be awesome.
So speaking of personal stories, I happen to be in a conversation, because we never know how far and wide like our conversations reach, and there's actually a member of my family who was at the state hospital. This is like the grandfather of the great. Is not buried there, but through this conversation about this project, it was, oh, my great grandfather, not mine, but
Yeah.
a family member was there, and then kind of passed away on the North Shore. But again, the history is a living history, right? We say that all the time, and I think that this is that. And so the place of recognition, if you will, is this beautiful spot, as folks can see, where there's a beautiful base. There's what is in the middle? Help me out.
So it's a circular table, we're going to mark that with some, Glenn has some very inspirational quotes he wants to put there, so we have a ways to go to get the names on the stone.
Right, so how many pillars are there?
There's 7 pillars
Seven
for,
pillars.
and it's contemplated to be 100 names on each pillar. And then we have a couple of different places for inspirational quotes. And we also have a carved stone, a created stone that has a crescent moon and some stars carved out of it. Now the first mason we worked with was Tony Molinari, and from the Molinari family from Milford. He was a tremendous mason. They're a masonry family. They worked at the stone quarries, and if you look at that, the masonry of that monument as it is now is spectacular.
It is,
And it was hard to get it to look like, the idea was that it grew there, that it came out of the ground to be there. And that is a testament to the masonry work. Wow. So Tony Molinari passed away after he completed the first phase. So his father donated that stone that Tony had created.
Wow.
And it adds to the magic of the
Yes,
place.
yeah.
And Steve Gallagher took on the remainder of the project to get it to where it is now. Steve Gallagher Masonry is out of Bellingham, and he's a tremendous mason, again, from a long line of masons in his family. So,
And so again, folks, you have to go there. I hope people take, after watching this, if you're not familiar, you have to go and see how beautiful this is at any time of the day. We've had Boy Scout projects to help with the kind of unearthing, if you will, cleaning up. When we were talking in between the break, Barbara reminded me that one of the Boy Scout Eagle projects that came out of this, working with this group, the family planted daffodil bulbs, and so that next year when those came up, it was a beautiful field of those. And so we have another Boy Scout who is working now with this group on an Eagle project, and a Girl Scout for a Gold Star project. So again, living history and our community engaging with it. So we've done all this great work, right? But the end is we're not there yet. So,
We're not there yet.
so I'm going to turn to the grand lady, the money lady, right?
Oh, yeah. I also just wanted to
Yes.
add to Ed's vision. Because the material is all natural,
Yes.
like you said, it really feels like it's part of
Yes,
this
it is.
space.
Yep.
And initially, that whole field was overgrown.
Yes.
So it took that was part of the
Yep.
work of the Scouts, was to clear
Yep.
the space.
Yep.
And that I think what's so special about the vision of the memorial is that it's very open and airy. And when you think about people that were at Westborough State Hospital, most
Confined.
people were on locked units
Yeah.
with
Yep.
no ability to
Yeah.
get out on their
Yeah.
own.
Yeah.
And
Freedom.
so there's a lot of openness to the memorial.
Yeah.
I think that,
Yeah.
and that matters. I
Yeah.
think that's meaningful.
Before we talk about the money, I do also want to give a shout out to former select board member George Barrett.
George Barrett, yes,
Right,
he
and-
opened a lot of doors for us and guided us to the right people to talk to.
Yeah.
He also worked with the Boy Scouts that were
Yes.
there, so it was great.
Yeah.
I'd also like to shout out to the cemetery.
Yep.
They've been more than wonderful, and the town clerk's office. I mean, there's the DPW.
And
Everybody
the support
has-
of the select board
Yes,
in particular
yes,
to,
right,
Yes.
yes, thank you
so
so
that
much.
we could become an entity
Right.
that allowed us to
Right.
actually get funds
Sure.
from the Department of Mental
Sure,
Health.
sure.
And
Excellent.
without that support, we wouldn't have gotten that.
Well, good. Well, we do good work. So,
Yes.
so,
Yes, you do. It's a great community.
so with that, you've
Yes.
raised $50,000 so far to get us to this place. Is that correct? In some way, whether
We
through grants
have.
or otherwise.
Yes.
Okay.
No
we're not
grants.
done.
So let's say,
I feel like I'm on a sales show, but we're not done, folks.
I want to be really clear
Yeah.
that there have been no grants. The
Okay.
majority of that
Okay.
$50,000, about $20,000 was raised through bake sales and raffle tickets. So every person that bought a brownie or a cookie
Thank you.
supported this
Yep.
memorial.
Okay, okay.
And people baking and people donating things and purchasing things out of their own money. So it really truly is grassroots
Yep.
in that many, many, many people have spent a lot of hours baking and creating and,
Sure.
and then standing in front of
Yep.
stores or at
Sure, sure.
5Ks and things
Sure,
like that.
sure.
And then we were very, very fortunate that with an ask to the Department of Mental Health, we were able to secure almost $30,000 last year that really propelled
Yep.
the project forward and just completed the most recent phase.
Sure. Okay.
And so we are next,
Yeah, where are we going?
we need about $45,000 more
Okay.
to complete the memorial.
Okay.
And those funds are for the bronze plaques that will have the names and then affixed to the pillars. We want some benches so
Sure.
that there are places to sit.
Sure.
And then, of course, the labor costs
Yep.
and
Sure.
things. So
Yeah.
that's where we are
Okay.
today.
So we're going to raise $45,000. It's going to start here, folks, right? We're transitioning for. I don't want to sound too salesy, but I am. Like, we're transitioning from something that's very emotional and personal and beautiful and all that we've talked about to we got to finish this project, right?
Right.
We really do. So I know our friends at Westborough TV will have, again, your website,
Yes.
the QR code, so
Yes.
folks can QR code that.
GoFundMe, and we are a 501c, so these are tax-deductible donations.
Excellent.
And
Do we have a
It-
timeline of,
ASAP.
I know yesterday,
As soon as
Yes,
possible.
right?
yesterday.
Yep,
I mean,
yep.
we really, we need the funds to be able to
go forward.
purchase, to
Yep.
go forward. So
Understood.
really, as soon as possible.
There was a big sigh over there from that.
We had a dream of trying to finish this spring.
Okay,
We're not there yet.
okay.
And I think just to kind of highlight, yes, we've raised almost $50,000, almost 30,000 of that from Department of Mental Health, which was one big
Yep,
check. But it has taken 12 years to raise that. And we know
good
there
point.
are other organizations
Yep.
and other charities that raise that very, very, very quickly.
yes, yeah, yep.
So we would love to increase the speed at which we raise the next
Okay.
$45,000.
Well, that was sort of when we all got together and started to build this relationship. That was also sort of my commitment as like, let's create awareness, right, about a very important story, but also create awareness about what you're trying to do from a fundraising perspective. Because I think this project it's a very important one to the history of this town, and I think sort of to our present history, particularly as we think about mental health and, removing the stigma and kind of recognizing where that is in all of our lives. So,
Yes.
all right,
And
great.
there is a saying that I'll steal from one of the other projects.
Sure.
We too have lived, loved, and laughed. And you have to remember that they were human beings.
Sure.
Some were, okay, I'll stop.
No, thank you.
Sorry.
So I want to thank all of you, Sarah as well, who's off
Yes.
camera, Glenn, who wasn't able to join us today, particularly Glenn, for starting this ball rolling, and to all of you for coming on, sharing your story, sharing your commitment, your passion. Folks, take some time. Things are getting warmer. Visit Pine Grove, walk to this project, take it in, and if you're able to, find that QR code, find their website, and consider making a donation. Let's get them to 45,000, and let's bring final dignity to these very important lives. With that, I thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the 01581 Let's Talk. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and be well.